Hey now folks, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and this is my top 10 list of board games for 2013. Now, as you may have noticed, I have an unusual beagle in my hands. Normally, you would see Bugbear in some of the videos before I stopped forcing her to pose for some of my review videos. But this is Honeybee. I don't always have her all the time, and it is Christmas and a special occasion, so I wanted to show her off. She's a purebred chocolate beagle, that's why she looks so much different than other beagles. So, Merry Christmas to Honeybee, and Merry Christmas to all of you that are watching this. I am actually filming this on Christmas Eve of 2013, so I hope that whatever holiday you're celebrating, you're having a very happy time with family, with friends, or just if you're by yourself, make the best of it. You know, what can I say? It's Christmas. I love Christmas, and it's a great time to celebrate everything that you enjoy, especially in my case, board gaming. So I'm going to relinquish Honeybee of her responsibility, which she does with an angry growl, and get down to business. So, a few things first. I want to qualify my list in a couple of ways. First off, obviously, I was not able to play every game that came out in 2013. In fact, some games that I even... dog hair. Some games that I even own, I sadly just did not have time to play. If you look back on my shelf back there, you see Bruges up at the top, which I really wanted to get a game in, but I just couldn't. I just got it last week. I also wanted to play Castaways, and I never got around to it. Battle for Souls, which I'm really, really eager to play and review. Just never got around to those games, even though I'm really excited about them. So obviously, this is not an absolutely comprehensive list of the games that I played and really enjoyed. Those comprise this list. Now, another qualification. What games actually were eligible for the list? Well, obviously, I was a stickler for the game actually having been released in 2013. I used Board Game Geek's database and sort of took the listing's word for it as to when they were released. I kind of played fast and loose with the rules on a couple of them. For instance, well, I can't really spoil the list, but there's at least one game that had a release prior to 2013, but it was a European release. And while it was possible to get the game, it really wasn't widely available until 2013 domestically, and that's the copy that I got, and that's when all the big hubbub and popularity of the game in the US was. So that's when I decided to, that's the year I decided to count it as. So consequently, it made it onto my list. You might even be able to guess what the game is based on everything that I just said. No expansions on this list. I wanted this to be just about core games. There were a lot of great expansions that came out this year. I'm thinking of two great expansions for Darkest Night. Just a lot of fantastic expansion for Seasons, which is my favorite game. But unfortunately, even Seasons came out in 2012, so that wasn't eligible. But I didn't want to count expansions because I wanted to focus just on core games that you can just bust out of the box and play. Although standalone expansions were counted, and you might even find one of those on my top 10 list. And also, before we get to the festivities, well, I'm going to tell you my bottom 5, which would be 11 through 15, just the honorable mentions. But before we even get to those, because it's not always roses and sunshine and rainbows on my channel, I'm going to talk about the 5 worst games that I played of the year. And I also should mention that I think that I get a bad rap sometimes from some critics of mine that I'm a little too positive in my videos. One thing to bear in mind is that I am a stickler, or I should say I'm very critical of the games that I choose to buy because I have very limited budget. I don't get free games. I get a couple of games for review, but you know, the games I really, really want, I have to buy. So I always read reviews. I make sure it's a game that's sort of in my wheelhouse that I might like, and therefore most of the reviews that I do are going to be at least somewhat positive, you know, good to great. And sometimes though I buy really bad games, or I kickstarted games that I didn't know much about. They look cool and they turn out to be duds. And when that happens, I will give them a bad review. And it's not just me trying to bash a game. I can, you know, do that in the forums or whatever. I really want to keep people from making the same mistake that I did, because there is nothing worse than being stuck with a bad game. So without further ado, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these games, let's go through my top 5 worst games. So at number At number 5, the 5th worst game that I played this year, ZPakka Lips. Now, ZPakka Lips had a lot going for it as far as theme and the idea of the game, how it was sort of semi-cooperative, but there were different scenarios where it could be purely cooperative. A lot of the things like that in the theme and even some of the individual mechanics worked really well in that game as far as getting survivors and then going through a fortification phase and all that. But man, all of it put together was just a big hot mess. Way too long, way too fiddly. It just horrible artwork. I did not like that artwork. I know some people do, but whew, I think they just cheaped out on it. But man, just a big letdown, disappointment. I got it secondhand. I'm glad I didn't actually Kickstart it, but whew, there's a lot of zombie games, and this is not one of the good ones. So that was ZPakka Lips, my 5th worst game of the year. Then we have one that I just got around to playing recently, and actually newly released and very controversial before its release, and that is Tentacle Bento. Now, I like Soda Pop Miniatures, the company that released this game, and this is just a card game. There's no miniatures in it, but I love Super Dungeon Explorer. I'm really looking forward to Relic Knights, which is a very long-delayed Kickstarter project that Soda Pop is doing. But Tentacle Bento sucks. I'm a sucker for Uno. Uno is a very simple game that gets a very bad rap, but I like it. I like its simplicity. I like its speed. This game tried to be Uno, but it's just way too long. It's for what it is, especially when you're playing with a lot of players. The game tells you to it can go from 2 to 6 players, but we recommend 2 to 4. Well, why did you put 2 to 6? Because the first game of this I played, we did it with 6 players, thinking, it's a quick Uno type game. That went on for over 2 hours before we finally decided to just call it. And when you get skipped in this game, as opposed to Uno, you might be waiting a very long time to get a turn. And the fact of the matter is, now look, I can play a game with a very risque theme. Obviously, I like Tanto a lot, if you're familiar with my channel. This game's theme is just really bad, and it's very hard for me to justify it, especially if it's a bad game. If it was a really great game, I might be able to justify the sort of tentacle rapey theme that this game has, even though it's pretty lightly pasted on. But I just couldn't get over it on this one, and neither could the people I was playing with. And the game was just not anywhere near good enough to justify it. So Tentacle Bento, my number 4 worst game of the year. We have Romance of the Nine Empires. Now, I really didn't know what to make of this game before I bought it. It's had a really curious backstory of it being sort of a meta game where there was this movie called The Gamers that the characters in the movie played this fictitious game in like a tournament style setting like Magic the Gathering, and actually the company AEG in real life designed this game for them for the movie, and then when the movie was kickstarted as a stretch goal, decided to make a real game out of this fake game and make a sort of fake mythos about it. And in reality, the game, this is getting way too convoluted, was based off of a old Legend of the Five Rings game called Burning Sands. But anyways, all of that convoluted backstory added up to a game that is just really needlessly rules convoluted and just mediocre at best. Even if you can sift through the very poorly written rule book and actually deal with the needlessly complicated gameplay, what you're left with is a game that tries so hard to be different than Magic the Gathering and other CCGs that it created a game that's, to me, just unplayable. I liked the idea of it. I liked the sort of HeroScape type theme where there's all these different alternate universes colliding in time and World War II soldiers fighting fantasy soldiers, but just didn't work for me. Romance of the Nine Empires, my 3rd worst game of 2013. Card of the Dead. Now, this was, I've been on a kick of Japanese micro games, very small card games that can be played very quickly, coming out of Japan, which just happens to be where all these games have been coming from for the most part in the last couple of years. Love Letter is the most notorious example of that, then Lost Legacy, Patronize, and so on. And so I said, Card of the Dead, well, okay, sure, AEG is picking it up from the original Japanese publisher, and I'm on board. Let me see. It shouldn't be it's cheap, should be fun, whatever. It's awful. It's just so awful. I mean, the gameplay is just simplistic to a fault. It's take that to the extreme where when you do the take that, you're totally screwing over someone else and essentially knocking them out of the game. But then the game goes on for another 10 to 15 minutes, like way too long for this type of game. Just didn't work for me. The artwork is okay. The theme is okay with zombies. I mean, whatever. I'm getting kind of burned out on zombies. Even I'm getting burned out on zombies at this point if it's not a great game. Card of the Dead, can't recommend it. Not good. Lots of other better micro card games. That's my second worst game of the year. And finally, my number one worst game of the year. If you're familiar with my channel, if you've been watching it from sort of the beginning, you probably know what I'm going to say, and that is Story War. Now, it's not just that this is a bad game, and it's a bad game. It's the fact that I kickstarted it, and, you know, my sort of honeymoon affair with Kickstarter as far as giving games a pass on poor mechanics, it sort of began, the end of that honeymoon phase sort of began with this game, because it was just such a disappointment, so bad. I liked the cute art style, and I liked the idea of it, but man, what it really boils down to is a game with very, very few rules that encourages shouting matches at groups of players, trying to appease a judge who will just arbitrarily make a decision that probably has nothing to do with the arguments of either side of the battle in the game. All the cards just have artwork and a little tiny bit of flavor text. There's nothing to them. You can make this game yourself with much better art that you just pull off of Google Images. They're doing another Kickstarter for a sequel, which will be the exact same game with just cards with different arts. I don't know what to say. I think it's a disaster. Sorry that it seems to be gaining some popularity and that they even sell it on Amazon. It's a horrible game. It's turned me off completely to the idea of games with judges, with the exception of Cards Against Humanity, which does it right. Story War, my number one worst game of 2013. Now, let's get to some good games that I actually want to talk about. Well, that's not true. I love talking about any games, but these are the bottom 5 of my top 10. Well, let me rephrase that. This is my 11 to 15. The games that just weren't quite good enough to make it to my top 10, but I think that they deserve special mention because they're really, really just great games. So, coming in at number 15 on my list was Level 7 Omega Protocol. Now, I never played the original Level 7. I heard a lot of bad things about it, which is too bad because it sounded like it had a really great theme of basically being human test subjects in an alien testing facility, kind of like Area 51, and having to semi-cooperatively escape. Now, in Level 7 Omega Protocol, you basically play the cleanup crew sent by the U.S. government to take care of the alien threat, basically like colonial marines from Aliens. It's actually a one versus all game because one of the players is the overseer controlling all the aliens. Very fun, very thematic, very cool, all the different maneuvers that the marines have and all the different powers that the overseer has. It's a little bit too long and fiddly. So that's probably why I didn't make it into my top 10, so I don't see it hitting the table very often, but it's still a very fun game, and I'm very happy with it. Level 7 Omega Protocol. Now, coming in at number 14 on my list, not quite making my top 10, is Freedom, the Underground Railroad. Now, Freedom is basically a history lesson in a box. Not a very flattering history lesson. This is a very dark period in our nation's past where about slavery, but it's very hopeful in the sense that the players are cooperatively working together as abolitionists trying to free slaves and get them across the border into Canada. It has very, very tight mechanics, great components, great historical artwork and feel on all of the cards. It probably didn't make it into my top 10 just because it's it's a pretty heavy game. It can be a little long, even despite what the box says. And it's a very, tense subject matter that not everyone's that comfortable with, or even if they're comfortable with it, they don't necessarily feel like playing it because it can kind of feel like a bummer. But still, I think it's a fantastically well-made game. I think that any American history teacher should have this in their class as, just play it because it's just, you need to engage kids any way you can, and this is the perfect way to do it. That's Freedom, the Underground Railroad from Academy Games. My number 13 is a much later game, a card game called Tryst from Victory Point Games. This game kind of came out of nowhere, like a lot of Victory Point games do for me. But it's basically a game for exactly 3 players. where one player is the Thieves Guild, one player is the City Watch, and one player is the Merchants Guild. And you're basically, they each have their own win condition, and you're trying to meet your win condition while keeping the other two factions at bay. And the way it works is very, very cool because it's all interconnected. The Thieves Guild is trying to steal from the Merchants. That's their, essentially that helps them meet their win condition. But the City Watch is trying to capture the thieves, which is part of their win condition, while at the same time taxing the merchant to keep him from meeting his victory condition of having a ton of money in his hand, which he has to protect from the thieves. It all just works together very, very well. It's more thematic than you would think for being just a somewhat simple card game, although it's not that simple, but you know, it is just 3 decks of cards essentially, well, 4 decks of cards with the treasure deck, but it all works very well. It's very fast. I would love to see, I don't know how you would do an expansion for it, but it's not in my top 10 mainly because it needs exactly 3 players. And you know, just looking at the game and sort of kind of the poor quality of the cards, although the artwork is cool, it can be a turnoff to some people, but I really love it. I can't wait to see more from this designer. Victory Point Games has really been knocking it out of the park lately for me, and I'm eager to see more of what they do. That's Tryst, my number 13 game of the year. Then we have an even smaller game, Tanabe. Now, technically speaking, Tanabe was released before 2013, but it was mainly over in Europe, and you could get it pretty easily. There was even another version of it with another small card game attached to it called Ikebana. But this year marked the official American release from R&R Games, and when it probably got the most attention. And in fact, it won the 2012 Spiel des Jahres, which was announced in the beginning of 2013, leading to it getting even more attention in this year, so I'm counting it for now. But anyways, Tanabe is a very abstract cooperative game from Antoine Bauza, who did some very not abstract games like Ghost of Stories. But basically, you're just trying to make, you are working cooperatively with other players to make colored, numbered sets of cards, 1 through 5, representing fireworks displays, which seems very, very simple. You just play one of those cards down on your turn. But the catch is that you cannot see the cards that are in your hand. You're holding your cards facing outward from you, and the other players cannot tell you what you have in your hand outright. They have to give you clues, which can only tell you numbers or colors, and can be misleading if they're not used correctly, and you only have a finite amount of them. And even though all you're effectively trying to do is just get get the best amount of points that you can, the game still feels very tense and stressful. There are people in my group who say, "Oh, Hanabi's a fine game. I don't want to play it," because it's just very stressful. But me, I don't mind the stress. I love it. I think that it works very well as a cooperative game. The only reason it's probably not in my top 10 is just because it's not that grandiose a game. It's a very small game, and like I said, it can be hard to get to the table with certain groups of people, but still a great game. Tanabe, that is my number 12 game of the year. And finally, my number 11 game of the year, and definitely the winner of the most unusual box size of 2013, would be Castle Dice from Fun to 11 Games. Now, Fun to 11 Games has done 3 major games, I think, that I know of. They did this one, Castle Dice, which was a Kickstarter project. They did Miskatonic School for Girls, their first Kickstarter project, which I've heard is quite awful. And then they did Pathfinder Dice Arena, which, if you saw my recent Kickstarter update, was canceled. So this game, however, as far as I'm concerned, is their one major claim to fame. It's a great resource management dice drafting game. At the beginning of the game, each of the players rolls a big pile of dice into a common pool, and then you go around the table drafting those dice to get resources like, you know, wood and iron and ore and things like that, that you're then going to try to build parts of your castle with in order to get victory points. But you can also use other cards from your hand and those resources to make workers like merchants and farmers who will give you a better opportunity to get those resources. You could also draft dice that will give you animals, and if you have the most of a certain type of animal in a round, it's going to give you a bonus. If you have the most chickens, it gets to increase your hand size. I know it's very silly in a way. The theme is very, very silly. If you get the most chickens, you'll have the most hand size. If you get the most horses, you'll go first in the round, and so on. It all works together very, very well. I actually kind of like the art style, although some people don't. It's very, very cartoony, but it's a neat game. It really gives me hope that Fun to 11 has some greatness in them as a new fledgling company. And I wish I had kickstarted this. I just bought it at retail, but great game. It probably doesn't make my list just because it's there's just other more grandiose games on my top 10 list, and maybe unusual box size puts me off a bit. No, that's probably not the reason, but still, it's a great game. You should check it out. I only had 10 spots on my list, but Castle Dice from Fun to 11, good game. Now, without any further stalling, let's get on to my top 10 games of 2013. Alright, my number 10 game of 2013 is Crossmaster Arena from Japanime Games. Now, this is one of the games that kind of flouts the rules a bit because this was actually available over in Europe as probably 2012 for sure, maybe even 2011. But in 2013, it was actually released after a very, very successful Kickstarter run by Japanime Games to actually make a North American version of it. And basically this game is based off of these two universes I don't really know much about. There's an online component of the game, but you have these cute chibi anime miniature factions who you'll draft them in the beginning, and you'll have a team of these characters, and you're going to use them to fight each other. It has really, really amazing components, and the gameplay to me feels a lot like a sort of tactics game, like Final Fantasy Tactics, but obviously much lighter than that. So I guess you could call it a tactical miniatures game, but it's very light, it's very fun. I would say it's probably a good family game, although maybe it's a little too complex for some very young kids, but cool components, cool theme to it, very, very nice looking, very cool gameplay. Crossmaster Arena, my number 10 game of 2013. Out of 10 times, if you asked me to play a train board game, I would probably turn you down. I mean, even Ticket to Ride, I'm just okay with. And most of the other train games I've seen are very, very deep, heavy Euros with very, very little theme, just very dry, and I have no interest in them. So 9 out of 10 times, I wouldn't play a train game. By coincidence, however, my number 9, see what I did there? Game on my top 10 list of 2013 is Trains. And this is from Hisashi Hayashi, I believe, without looking at the box. I was right. And this is the AEG re-release. I guess I'm actually flouting the rules a lot on games, but this was a game previously either 2011 or 2012 from Hisashi Hayashi over in Japan. AEG did a whole redo of the game with new and improved artwork, new and better components just to make it look gorgeous. I've seen pictures of the old one, and it's nothing like this. But basically, it's a deck building game that functions a lot like Dominion, like a lot of the other Dominion clones. But it's got a very interesting mechanic in that there's actually a board where you're playing cards in order to actually build railways and train stations out across a map in order to get more and more victory points. And you're also gaining victory points the traditional way by getting victory point cards, by building your deck and things like that. But, you know, this was kind of a slam dunk for me. Beautiful components. I love deck building, and I love the theme of... I mean, it works well. It's not like it's a very thematic game, but building the trains and stations feels very, very cool. Eager to get this on the table again. I haven't played it in a little while, not since I reviewed it, but that's Trains. That's my number 9 game of 2013. Alright, so there are worker placement games where you methodically and slowly place your worker, and you take your resource, or you take your action, and then you pass your turn to the left. And then there are worker placement games where you place your worker, and someone else says, "No, why did you do that? I needed that, and what's happening? And oh no, don't draw a card from the event deck, it's gonna kill us all!" That is what my number 8 game is. That is Yido. This is from Pandasaurus Games, and this is just... it's just a mean game. And I don't even mean necessarily the players. I mean, I actually think this has less of a sort of screw you factor than games like Lords of Waterdeep does. Even as late as that game does, that game has more screw you than this. but the game is just brutal on you. The event deck that comes with this, and they recommend that you don't use it for your first game, but I say just do it because you're going to need to peel off that band-aid eventually. It can really, really mess you over. You have earthquakes that will destroy your buildings, and the couple of games that we played, someone spent like a couple of rounds getting the resources necessary to build one of the buildings that your workers can make in this game and just having it destroyed by a card. And while that sounds like the makings of a bad game, it really all works together very well. This is a very, very tight worker placement game. I really love the theme. You could make an argument that it's sort of pasted on like a lot of other worker placement games like Lords of Waterdeep, but the fact is, very, very beautiful artwork. You're going out on missions, and all the missions are themes like assassinate the shogun or burn down the ships in the harbor. There's lots of cool stuff going on the board. The components and artwork are just beautiful, and I really love it. It's a tense game. I mean, just like when I was talking about Tanabe, some games are just very stressful and they can't hit the table all the time, and not with the groups that you'd like. But man, I would love to play this again. I'd love to play it right now. That's Yito, my number 8 game of 2013. Okay, for my number 7 entry on the list, I'm actually going to cheat a bit and put in 2 games that are essentially the same game. If you've been watching my channel recently, you know what I'm talking about. The first of those games is War Machine High Command, and its sister game is Hordes High Command. They are both based off of the miniatures games from Privateer Press of the same name, and Privateer Press did these games as well. And much like the miniatures games, there are separate games that can be played standalone, but they can also be mixed together. You can have your hordes fight your war machines in the miniatures game, and you can also have factions from War Machine fight the factions from hordes. Now, the reason that I really love this game is that I love deck building. I've said that many, many times. But I also love the fact that this has much more interaction than other deck building games. Deck building games can feel like a solitary experience even when you're playing with multiple players. But in this game, there is it's very, very tough interaction. You're actually fighting over territory. And that can be kind of brutal, and it can be kind of back and forth. And some people don't like the long, drawn-out combat. I personally like it. I think it adds a sense of excitement to the game that a lot of other deck builders don't have. This also has a very, unique mechanic. I haven't really seen it in a lot of other deck builders, or if at all, where you're actually buying from your own personal faction deck. You're not buying from either a common center deck like in Ascension, or from a pool of several different types of cards like in a Dominion or Trains even. So I really like that. I like the theme. I like the artwork. The game does have problems, and I hate to talk about them on my top 10 of the 2013, but they're worth noting. I mean, the game can be long. The type is small. The 2 games are really, really the same, which is kind of disappointing. War Machine is not that different from Hordes. And also, it's not very colorblind friendly, but really, it's a testament to how much I like this game that I'm kind of willing to overlook those things. I'm not colorblind, by the way, but I feel for people that are. But really great deck building game, really great theme. I really like it, and I can't wait to play either of them or both of them together again. That's War Machine Hordes High Command, my number 7 game of 2013. Okay, probably one of the games I'm going to get the most flack for putting on my list, especially so high on the list at number 6, is Tanto Romantic Vacation. Now, this is an expansion for Tanto, and I said at the beginning I didn't want to include expansions, but this is actually a standalone expansion. Here, put it over here. Where it's the same basic theme as the other games, where you're the master of a house and you're trying to employ maids to work in your house and to acquire more maids, employ more maids, and to get that and use your love to make them have illustrious careers and make your mansion better. Now, all of that is just sort of a thin veneer of what is essentially just a very strong deck building game. One of the closest Dominion clones I've played, but I like it much better than Dominion for a couple of reasons. First off, say what you will about the theme. I like anime, I like the artwork here, so it works for me. But I also like some of the new things that this adds to the genre as far as, each set of Tentacle Bento has a different main mechanic. In this one, especially, and why, if I did a list, this would be my favorite of all 3 of the Tentacle Bento sets, is the Reminisce cards, where they're a separate stack or allotment of cards you have access to every round, but you can only acquire the cards by doing some certain type of tactic, which is usually discarding a certain set of cards. It could be discarding 4 or 5 maids that have a cost of 3, or discarding 2 level 3s, 2 level 4s, something like that, or discarding a number of cards with a total cost equal to whatever. Very difficult to do, but if you do them, not only do you get a lot of victory points, but it usually has a special effect, and I just think that's a very neat mechanic. I think that some of the other cards have very neat interactions. Like, for instance, there's a lot of cards in this set where you can only buy a certain amount of these maids before they start counting as negative points against you, and it's just very cool. It goes very fast. I like it a lot. It's one of the most solid deck builders I've ever played, and this is the best set of that game, despite what the theme is. So, Tentacle Bento Romantic Vacation, my number 6 game of 2013. Now, I just mentioned earlier in this video that I love the game Seasons. It's one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game. But one of the few things I don't like about Seasons is that even though you're supposed to be powerful wizards, it can feel kind of abstract. I mean, when you're drafting all those cards in the beginning, it can really get down to just a sort of number crunching game of what's really going to maximize your points, and it doesn't feel very thematic. There's another card drafting game that came out this year that has the same kind of drafting at the beginning of each round of the game, but fixes that thematic problem by actually having the cards be very useful in the game. And that game is Lost Legends from Queen Games, from Mike Elliott, who did Thunderstone and Warriors and a lot of other things. But in Lost Legends, what you're actually trying to do is go through the different levels of a dungeon. It's your typical, like, sort of adventuring party type thing. You've got a dwarf and a wizard, and each player takes a different control of a different one of those characters. But the cards that you draft at the beginning of each round are essentially equipment that you're equipping your characters with. You have to buy them. You have to put them on certain slots in your player board. Like, you put your armor here, your shields here, and you keep your spells and your spell books and your weapons, and you can only have a certain amount of weapons and armor, and you have to pay for them, and you also get a certain number of skills that will enhance those weapons. And then once you get done with all that draft, which can be very, very crunchy and just trying to think like, what do I really need? Am I going to need this for the next level or not? You just go down in that dungeon after that, and you are on your own. Each player is trying to defeat whatever monster comes in front of them. They have the option, possibly, if another player has already defeated their monster, of passing the monster over to one of those other players in the lineup. But then you never know what monster you're going to get stuck with, because you always have to have a monster to fight on your turn, and you might be helping out the other player by giving them more experience and coins for defeating that monster. You just never know. The draft is super critical in this game. It can be, in that sense, it can be very tense and stressful, but I like it a lot. It's just a very tightly wound game. I love the card drafting aspect. I love the theme of it. And it can be a little bit long, but other than that, I just think it's a fantastic game. Lost Legends is my number 5 game of 2013. Now, earlier I mentioned a Pathfinder game that was canceled, the Pathfinder Dice Arena, but a Pathfinder board game that actually saw the light of day, to put it mildly, was the Pathfinder Adventure card game, and that is my number 4 game of 2013. And when I say put it mildly, it's because this game just hit like a storm. I mean, I heard about this much earlier in the year and thought, well, that seems neat, but I really don't think people are going to be that interested in. I mean, like, okay, sort of deck building game, but not really cooperative, based off of the Pathfinder license. Who's really going to be into that? But by the time Gen Con came around and the game was going to premiere, there was just like this huge upswell of interest in it, leading to the game just like selling just thousands and thousands of copies. And they've already sold tons and tons of the expansion packs that are coming out, and the expansion packs are coming out regularly. I mean, the game is just really blown up, and for good reason, I think. I mean, it's a fantastic game. It's, you know, it's a very, very light role-playing game, because you're taking control of a character and you're going through these different adventures and quests trying to defeat villains and their henchmen that are sprinkled throughout these location decks, and your particular character can only have certain types of cards in their deck, armor, weapons, spells, items, allies, things like that you construct your deck with, but you might be able to add more cards to your deck during the adventure and then may be able to keep them at the end. Therefore, you're making your character stronger, and eventually you'll even get special permanent bumps to your stats, which is why I recommend putting the cards in sleeves so you can mark them. But anyways, it's, you know, it's not really a role-playing game in the sense that there's really not a lot of story to it. It can feel like just a typical card game at times, and so they cut corners on some of the artwork. The artwork's just reused from the Pathfinder role-playing game series, but nevertheless, I think it's a very fun game. It doesn't go too long depending on the number of players you have. It can be played solo, and it still works just fine. It can go up to 6 if you have the character add-on pack. I think it's great. I love the way it works and how the mechanics interact with one another. The rulebook needs a lot of work, but other than that, I think that Paizo really, well, obviously they have a hit on their hands, but I think this has longevity. I think that they've already announced another master set to the game, and I think that this is a system that can be used with a lot of different genres. I'd love to see a core Dungeons and Dragons game based off of this, but good luck. That's probably not going to happen. But that is the Pathfinder Adventure card game, my number 4 game of 2013. So the first core set of the game that comes in at number 3 on my list actually released in 2012, earlier in 2012, and it's a great game in its own right. But the new core set and expansion for this game that came out just this year after being on Kickstarter really just blew it out of the park as far as component quality and gameplay ability and replayability, and that is Zombicide Season 2 Prison Outbreak. And while I'm really only talking about this set just for good measure, as part of the Season 2, so to speak, is the Toxic City Mall. And I have all of the tiles for the game in this box, and it is very, very heavy, like including Season 1. But anyways, in Zombicide, it's very, very simple. It's a pure cooperative game where you're all survivors trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse. But whereas in other types of zombie games, like in ZPakka Lips, you're trying to, it's like sort of semi-cooperative, and you're trying to build fortifications, and there's a lot of like resource management and things like that. Or as opposed to a game like Dead of Winter, which is a game I play tested where it's a lot of negotiation. In Zombicide, it's just straight up killing zombies. You're just equipping yourself, searching, equipping, finding gear, and trying to rip through zombie hordes to get to your objective as quickly as possible. It's very, very fast paced. It's very, very tense at times. Some of the expansions that come out in this particular game really ratchet up the difficulty a bit. There's new types of zombies like Berserker zombies, which you can only kill with melee weapons, which is worse than you would think, even though they do add a lot of cool new weapons in both of these sets. There's the Toxic City Mall actually adds toxic zombies, which are even worse. Just having new survivors, having the new zombivore mode, which sort of eliminates a player elimination problem, because if you die once, you actually get to come back as a zombivore and actually tougher, but zombivore, however you want to say it, survivor, zombivore, but I've been corrected on that. But you may still die again. And you still have the problems with targeting, the same old, you attack survivors first with a ranged weapon in other zones, but still, I really love this game. I really love that it's easy to teach. It's kind of difficult to set up, but once you get it going, it's fast, it's fun. It feels more like a zombie game than some of the other zombie games I've played as far as the theme goes. and the miniatures are just out of this world. So Zombicide Season 2 lived up to all of its hype, enough that it makes my number 3 spot of the top 10 games of 2013. I love games that tell a story, but unfortunately I've had some very bad luck with quote-unquote storytelling games where you just go and have random encounters and some stuff happens to you and you don't really have any control over it, and it doesn't actually ever feel tightly bound to the rules and mechanics of the game. And I'm looking at you, Tales of Arabian Nights. But there is one game that came out this year, actually came out last year, and this is the game I was referring to at the beginning of this video, that managed to have very tight, awesome mechanics and have the story of the game come out through those mechanics. And that is Robinson Crusoe Adventures on the Cursed Island from Porto Games and Ignacy Trevijek. And I'm sure that I butchered his name again. I'm very sorry, sir. That seems to be the running joke in the board gaming community. But nevertheless, Ignacy, you have designed yourself a hell of a game. In Robinson Crusoe, it's only thinly based on the actual Robinson Crusoe book, but you play a group of survivors who are trying to get through a certain objective while being stranded on an island. In the very first scenario, you're just trying to light a big enough fire to attract rescuers, a rescue ship, to get rescued from the island. In the next scenario, you're trying to relieve this cursed fog from the island by planting crosses. There's a scenario for cannibals, and I mean, a volcano. Things just, there's all these different, very thematic, very fun scenarios in the game, and they're all very hard. This is a very hard game, but it's hard for a reason. Like I said, the story is trying to be brought out through the mechanics in this, and being stranded on an island is very stressful and very hard, and a lot of things can kill you. And you have to worry about building a shelter, because if you don't build a shelter, the rain and the snow is going to make all of your characters lose health and lose food. And speaking of food, you have to feed your people every day. And if you don't feed your people, then you're going to lose health, which is going to make you lose morale, which is going to make you possibly get one step closer to losing the game. You have to worry about inventing things. You invent tools in order to use on the island and make things easier for yourself. You have to go and hunt animals in order to get food for your people, but hunting animals might lead to wounds, and you need weapons to hunt the animals too. You need to go on adventures because, well, you may not want to go on adventures, but adventures could do good things for you, but then those adventure cards can go into the event deck and come up later and do bad things to you. And some of the events go down a track, and if you don't take care of the event before it falls off the track, something bad is going to happen to you. But if you take care of the event, something good might happen as well. Like I said, this game is very difficult. It can be kind of difficult to figure out. It can be very fiddly. But it just feels so thematic. There's some very, very awesome fluff on some of the event cards. You really feel like you're telling a story through each of the scenarios. And it's so tough that when something good happens, you just leap out of your chair and you yell because it's such an awesome experience. I've played this game several times now, and I have not had a bad game of it, even when we lost horribly. This is just fantastic. Adventure in a box. Lives up to its name. Robinson Crusoe, Adventure on the Cursed Island, my number 2 game of 2013. All right, we have made it up to number 1 of my top 10 list of games of 2013, and this is one of the newest games on this list. The newest games I've played at all this year. It only came out about a month or so ago, but man, I've played it several times since it came out, and it is just so good. And it's a little long. It's hard to get to the table. Maybe I need to take a break before I play it again, but I'm thinking of playing it right now, even solo, if I really want to be a maniac and stay up all through Christmas Eve night. But this is a fantastic game. Without further ado, I am talking about Eldritch Horror. Now, listen, I've played Arkham Horror before, and it's an okay game. But I had to get rid of it from my collection because the fact of the matter was it was too long, too fiddly, couldn't get it to the table, and it just did not excite any of the players that I tried to play it with. it has its place. I don't think that this is going to replace Arkham Horror for a lot of people, because I think there are things that Arkham Horror does that people play for a certain reason, that sort of crunchy cooperative style that of numbers and puzzling and things like that. But Eldritch Horror is telling a story. Now, I said in my Robinson Crusoe little summary there that a lot of storytelling games, you get it wrong. They try to tell a story, but then they have awful mechanics, and it feels like it's just this pasted on story that doesn't do much. Eldritch Horror gets it right, because it's got some of the same simplistic elements of Arkham Horror that did work for me, but it has these very, very cool thematic cards and encounters that you do. And you always have choices of different encounters that you can have. And so you always feel like you're doing something that you have some choice over it. And it sort of eliminates the alpha gamer problem that you see in a lot of pure cooperative games, because in those kind of games, and Pandemic is probably the worst offender of this, it's very simple for one person to just tell everyone else what to do, because it seems like there's a very obvious path. In Eldritch Horror, not so, because you never know what that encounter you're going to have is going to be. And you have so many options of different encounters that it's hard for other people to just say, this is the obvious thing that we should do. Sometimes you're in emergency situations like that, but really you need everything in this game. You need to go to a certain location and get clues in order to go and finish off this rumor mystery that's happening. Well, who's going to do that? Well, maybe you should do that. Well, but I'm closer. Well, okay, you go ahead and do it. But I really want to check out this unexplored area mystery, because those usually give you really cool things. So I think it might help us. And everyone else says, okay, sure, whatever. It's what you want to do, as long as everything that you do can be working towards the goal of the party. And that's a really great feeling. This is a Cthulhu game. Some people are burned out on Cthulhu, and you can fight Cthulhu and some of the other gods that popped up in Arkham Horror. All of the characters, I thought they were different, but apparently they're from other expansions I never delved into for Arkham Horror, and maybe even Elder Sign. But still, great components, great artwork, very, very fun, very thematic. You can even have encounters with your dead or insane former characters. It's a trip. Watch my review. I really love this game. I can't wait to see more expansions for it. That might be the only issue with the game, is that I've already seen a lot of the mystery cards that have come up. But still, tight cooperative game. I really was actually surprised at how many cooperative games made it on my list, but this is the best of them. Eldritch Horror, my #1 game of 2013. Well, this video has gone on way too long, but hey, what can I say? I love board games, and this was a fantastic year for board games. This is actually my first full year really into the hobby. I had dabbled in board games before the end of 2012, but this past year have been the most hardcore for me. Obviously, if I'm started a video channel for it, you know that I'm hardcore about board games. And I happened to come in at a time where we're really in the golden age of board games. So many good games came out this year. So many other games had the opportunity to get on my list. Great games that I played, but I had to whittle it down to 10, 15. And it's just a testament to how good the year was. It's kind of daunting. I mean, maybe I kind of wish at times that I had been born into this world of board gaming in an earlier year, when things are much slower paced, and I can kind of ease myself into it and refine my taste even more. Whereas now I just had this kind of avalanche, like this buffet of great board gaming goodness that I have to sort of sift through and find out what the best is. But really, that's a great problem to have in a lot of ways. Definitely a first world problem. I love board games. I can't wait for the next year and just to see how my tastes are going to change and what my list is going to look like next year and all the different games. And who knows, by the end of 2014, maybe I'll have played and liked and loved enough games to actually have my own top 100 list. We'll see. So, my name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I am wishing you all a very, very Merry Christmas from the bottom of my heart. Get out there and game this year, every day, in every way. Take care.